Okay. Westlake affirms the resolution. Our first contention is ending endless wars. America's lack of foreign policy strategy in the Middle East has created a forever war that has lasted over 20 years. Political 18 analyzes the fluctuations in policy. First, we intervene to create security, and then we withdraw when we fear we overstepped. This creates turmoil in the Middle East, sparking political outcry, ultimately compelling the US to intervene again. This sets the stage for dramatic conflict, as Siegel 19 confirms that the probability of an all-out war in the Middle East is at historic highs. Moore writes a month ago that America's best shot to end the cycle isn't a total withdrawal of U.S. troops, but rather keeping a small, predictable presence that'll satisfy the public's concerns while also supporting partners in the region. Specifically, removing nearly all of our military presence puts a stop to perpetual conflict in two ways. The first is the Iranian standoff. Ruhi 20 explains that Washington's aggressive approach against Iran has started a series of escalatory moves and countermoves. Bashar 19 writes that these actions only empower Iranian hardliners who pressure their government to provoke the U.S., inevitably evoking violent reactions. Ruhi furthers that as the situation becomes more dire in Iran's eyes, it is now extremely likely that they will withdraw from the NPT and pursue nuclear weapons. Fortunately, DePetris 20 explains that removing our military presence from the Persian Gulf would be the biggest step towards de-escalation because it has only served to increase tensions in the region. Second is reviving the GCC. The Gulf Cooperation Council was established in 1981 with the purpose of resolving conflicts and maintaining unity within the Persian Gulf. Unfortunately, Ely's 20 reports that despite having significantly more advanced armed forces and over 11 times the amount of military expenditure, the GCC has been unable to effectively combat Iranian challenges. Young 20 explains that bilateral talks with the US inhibit the creation of a coalition. This is because countries in the Persian Gulf have political differences that dissuade cooperation. Ultimately, this has undermined the united front against Iran with no trust between Gulf states. Forcing the reuniting of the Persian Gulf is key, as Quartzman 18 finds that while Iran is often accused of being aggressive in the region, every Iranian action simply exploited the self-destructiveness and lack of unity of the Arab states. Indeed, Ashford 18 concludes that as long as America remains the strongest force in the region, GCC states will continuously fail to form alliances that they would have otherwise. Reviving the GCC is the only possible path to peace. As Front Rows writes a few days ago, that escalation will inevitably result in conflict as Iranian hardliners mistrust and block negotiations with the US. Fortunately, the GCC is the one organization that could be the hero and form lasting peace because it shares interests with Iran and has much more to lose. The situation is ripe for change, as Long 19 adds that Gulf states like Oman are uniquely positioned to diffuse regional tensions as they actually maintain close ties with Iran. For this reason, Vlasco 17 quantifies that regional organizations like the GCC are 6.7 times better at forming lasting peace agreements compared to outside actors. The overall impact is war. Haltingwigger 20 finds that a conventional war with Iran would kill hundreds of thousands of people, reverberate all across the Middle East, and draw on great powers such as China and Russia. Contention 2 is the Saudi situation. Our military presence gives unwavering confidence to our currently reckless allies. Tabatabai 18 explains that Saudi Arabia has become extremely reliant on the US, with their diplomatic support and military presence driving their continued aggressive policies. With this overconfidence, Parsi 20 reports that the Saudis have initiated proxy wars against Iran in numerous places throughout the region, including Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, angering and provoking Iran. These wars must be stopped. Fortunately, Parsi 20 furthers that last year, when the US appeared to back out of the region, the Saudis and Emiratis' calculations tilted towards diplomacy rather than aggression, seeing as they simply had no other choice but to cease the recklessness. For example, Saudi Arabia began negotiations with the Houthi rebels that eased tensions in Yemen and brought the number of Yemeni civilian casualties down to 0. In Yemen alone, Lynch 19 quantifies that 482,000 people are estimated to die if the war continues through 2022. Ultimately, the Small Wars Journal 18 furthers that these proxy wars are reaching a boiling point where they could break out into an all-out war between Iran and Saudi Arabia as they continuously ease up close to their borders. For these reasons, we are proud to affirm.
Okay.
Before Seth reads case, a quick content warning. Part of our case deals with issues of police brutality and police militarization. Is that okay with everyone? And that includes the observers too. If anyone has issues with that, you can put it in the chat as well. And we can have a discussion about how to discuss that properly in the round. I'll give everyone a minute to. Just making sure before we read, everyone is okay with that? Okay.
Okay. We're good? We negate. Contention 1 is terrorism. Oh wait, is this the wrong? This is the wrong case. Sorry. Okay. This is the right case. Now is everybody ready? Okay. We negate. Contention 1 is terrorism. U.S. counterterror efforts in the Gulf have been extremely successful. The IEP finds in 2019 that U.S. military efforts have reduced deaths from terrorism by 75% in Iraq. Problematically, Schmidt 20 of the New York Times reports that a recent cessation of U.S. operations against ISIS has allowed the remains of the group to regain strength in Iraq and Syria. A U.S. withdrawal would overwhelm the region with a terrorist resurgence. Alyssa Rubin 20 of the New York Times finds that Iraqi forces would be hampered by a lack of U.S. drone intelligence and air cover. New America 19 continues that vital U.S. training built the current Iraqi counterterrorism force from the ground up. Additionally, Lewis Lovelock 20 of the Washington Post finds that the current U.S. presence in the Gulf provides deterrence. Terrorist groups know that the U.S. can attack and destroy them, which is why Belcher of LaGrange College explains that having large numbers of troops on foreign soil reduces annual terrorist attacks from 163 to 9. Walcott 19 of Time furthers that a withdrawal would create a power vacuum in the Gulf and give ISIS the ability to mount attacks, upending 5 years of counterterrorism progress. Schmidt writes that if the United States were to pull its troop presence from Iraq, the region would be left vulnerable to a resurgent terrorist wave, just like what happened in 2011 when Obama pulled out troops from Iraq. Affirming jeopardizes millions of lives, as Benaim 20 of the New York Times finds that 40 million civilians are vulnerable to an ISIS resurgence. Contention 2 is police militarization. After the U.S. withdraws its troops from abroad, the War History magazine writes that we have millions of weapons left over in stockpiles. Apuza 14 of the New York Times finds that when the military has surpluses of weapons, they give those to state police officers, the DoD 1033 program. Thus, Fisher 16 of the Reason Foundation finds empirically that large weapon stockpiles have enabled police officers to load up on state-of-the-art war machines, tactical gear, guns, and explosives. We've seen this historically. Massera 15 of U Madrid quantifies that after U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan in 2009, the number of severely militarized departments rose by 28 percentage points. High levels of police militarization exacerbate the problem of police brutality in 2 ways. First is by making them seem invincible. Jesse Singal of New York Magazine explains in 2018 that giving the police military-grade weapons encourages them to see the public as the enemy and act more violently. Second is by mandating excessive force. Amanda Taub of Vox explains in 2018 that the DoD 1033 program, which supplies weapons to police, requires that all equipment be used within a year, forcing small operations to escalate to SWAT-style raids. The impact is preventing racialized violence. Singal continues that over-militarization of the police allows for an increase in killings and crackdown on freedom of speech and public protest. The BBC found in 2016 that police brutality killed 1,000 Americans that year, most of whom were Black or Latino. Contention 3 is the U.S. security guarantee. Hogerdell 19 of the Center for Strategic Studies explains that U.S. military presence is the best security guarantee available to allies in the Persian Gulf. A sudden U.S. withdrawal disrupts regional stability in 2 ways. First is scaring Israel. Harel 19 of Horace explains that Israel's longstanding fears of Iran have been heightened after the recent perceptions of an American desire to withdraw from the Gulf. As a result, Mazzetti 20 of the New York Times explains that Israel repeatedly pressured the United States to maintain a hard stance on Israel and increase strikes against proxies in Iraq and Syria. American presence prevents further escalation, as Abbott 14 of U. Lesser warns that Israel is only restrained by a U.S. military presence acting as a counterweight to Iran. U.S. withdrawal.
Wait, sorry, pausing. Did someone say clear or?
No, if y'all are observing, please mute your mics because it creates an echo effect.
Yeah, all observers, please mute. I just put instructions in the chat for that.
It looks like everyone is muted, but the observer from Plano West. Can the observer from Plano West please mute themselves?
I just force muted them so you can continue.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Did you guys miss anything?
I have you at 253 and you basically just finished the Abbott card.
Okay, cool. So triggering an Israeli attack on Iran. Critically, Farley 20 of the National Interest finds that an Israeli strike on Iran could easily go nuclear. Horace concludes that the resulting war would embroil the remaining U.S. military in Israel, and Dallas 13 of Biomed Central quantifies that 7 million civilians would be killed. The second link is proliferation. Hal Brands 15 of the Foreign Policy Research Institute finds that U.S. security guarantee has prevented the nuclearization of countries since the 1950s, from Germany and Italy to South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Van Jackson 15 of Foreign Policy explains that because U.S. military presence assures allies are less likely to launch preventative strikes. J. Wellington Brown of the U.S. Air Force finds that this presence asserts his allies are not considering nuclearization right now. Absent military presence, however, Brands continues that the U.S. would likely lose its non-proliferation leverage, which Brown finds would lead allies like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt to nuclearize. Unfortunately, Hogerdell continues that U.S. withdrawal would spur an arms race leading to military confrontations. Brown continues that were Saudi Arabia, for example, to nuclearize, Israel would launch an attack on Saudi Arabia preemptively, resulting in region-wide conflict between the Arab states and Israel. Overall, Douglas Gibler, 05 of the University of Kentucky, confirms that arms races increase the chance of war by 500%, and Allison 18 of Kent State explains that when a power has nuclear weapons, it increases the chance of proxy wars by 54%. Thus, we negate.
Are you ready for cross?
Yeah.
Just so you know, Oh wait, my bad. Okay, you ready?
You good?
Cool. Yeah. So on your third contention about Israel, the resolution says that we should remove nearly all of our military presence from the Persian Gulf. Is Israel in the Persian Gulf?
Well, our argument is not removing troops from Israel is why they launch a strike.
Okay, so as long as we have troops in Israel, they still have the U.S. security guarantee, correct?
There are two problems though. First of all, we say that if we remove presence from the Gulf, Israel fears that Iran is now able to expand more, so they get threatened. And B, they fear that since we've pulled out troop presence from
Wait, can I
other
stop you at
allies,
the first point?
I'll just say the B point. Because we pulled out presence from other allies, they could be next. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so my problem is that if Iran is going to expand, as long as Israel knows that its borders and its frontiers are defended by the United States military presence, because we're not pulling out of Israel specifically, that means that there's no reason to be fearful.
Well, the second thing I said answers that, and also Israel
What's the
views
second thing
Iran
you
as
said?
an axis. What?
What's the second thing you said?
The second thing is since they pulled out troop presence from other allies, Israel fears they could be next. And moreover, in response to the first thing you said, we also think that, and since Israel views Iran as an existential threat, our evidence is that
if we analyze like the history of like Israel's relationship with the United States, they've had security ties since the 50s. Like there has always been security between the two regions. So how likely is it that that Israel is just going to be like, oh, like the United States is going to completely
we've never
destroy us under your
pulled
presence?
out and abandoned close allies before. So if we do that in the Gulf, Israel fears they could be next. Can I ask you a question? We spent half the part.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your argument about the GCC. So why is it that bilateral negotiations are worse than multilateral negotiations?
The reason why we say bilateral negotiations are worse is because our front row's evidence indicates that whenever they do bilateral negotiations with the United States, what Iran does is they block the negotiations and prevent diplomacy from happening. Whenever you switch to a multilateral body where it's not the United States in the region who is an impartial actor, I mean, not an impartial actor, a biased actor, then it's way more likely that Iran abides by these diplomatic talks.
The evidence you read also says that it's because there's distrust between Iran and the US.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the analysis that we'll make.
Wait. So can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So isn't there also tons of distrust between like Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example, and other?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? What we say is that first of all, even if there's distrust between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the Oman evidence says that Oman's uniquely positioned to diffuse regional tensions. But the second thing is that even if they have political difference, wait, just let me finish. The second thing is that even if they do have political differences, Iran is the biggest threat in the region, and they're willing to overcome those political differences in the absence of U.S. military presence to stop one of the biggest threats to their security.
Okay, why is Oman key to tensions? Also,
our Oman evidence indicates that Oman has close ties with Iran, which allows them to diffuse regional tensions.
Okay, wait. So if they have close ties with Iran, why would the other side trust them? But also,
can Neil from Plano East mute themselves?
And Joshua
and Josh from Lexington.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's just I think someone's cat is in the background and it's a little distracting.
Okay.
Are y'all gonna run prep before rebuttal?
Oh wait. Okay, class is over. I actually need to see some evidence.
Yeah.
I need the external link evidence on the second disadvantage. And I also need.
I'm so sorry. I have no clue what that means. What's the tag?
Just like whatever says that like pullout just increases the amount of gear to like, I guess, domestic police in the second contention.
Yep, I got you.
And then I need the I need whatever link says that pullout causes mass prolif across the Middle East in your second link of your third contention.
Okay.
I just sent the 2 on police militarization, and I'm getting you. What was the other one that you wanted?
I need the whichever just says like US pullout leads to like Middle East prolif, specifically the part which is like which countries proliferate.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna have to take some technology preparation because I think the host just kicked out my partner.
Yeah, take your time, man.
Yeah, let me get Miles real quick. Yeah, we noticed you got kicked out. I told them. Okay, so we're just gonna be sitting here, I guess.
Sorry, we're trying to only remove people with observer before their name, but sometimes the technology messes up.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
It's Miles. Did you set a name?
Did I say what?
Did you set your name to like not observer? I guess.
Yeah, I did. I said Westlake. Oh.
Oh, maybe we need to put debater before it. Is that
Oh.
right?
Yeah, if everyone could put the debater if you're debating, that would
Okay, cool.
like help clear.
Jason, mute yourself on the call.
Oh yeah, sorry. All right.
Jason, are you still taking prep?
I'm waiting for the prolif card.
Oh.
Just sent the other one.
Okay, I'll start prep when we receive it. Give me a second. There's okay, cool. Hold up, one question. Do you read like the underlined, or since there's no highlighting?
We were citing the underline.
We're
part.
citing all underlined parts. Yeah. Do you want to go and recut it more, or?
Yeah, it's just like a block of text right now, but
It's
I'll just it should be fine.
Wait, it's a block of text. I thought I had the.
No, it's just like most of it is bold and underlined. Then there's no highlighting, so I don't know what's red. So it's just a bold and underline, right?
Oh, nothing is red. We don't read cut cards.
Oh, okay, cool. That's fine.
Please don't run paraphrase theory on us.
Don't worry. I think theory is uneducational, should never be run.
Why'd you run it last round?
Who knows? Okay, so I took 21 seconds. Cool. So the order is going to be an overview that you can flow at the top of the negative constructive, and then I'll just be going down, and yeah, that's about it. Is there anyone not ready? Actually, I can't. Let me set my timer. Cool. Let's start with the overview. Our case uniqueness about the yo-yo as well as the small consistent presence takes out their case. If the US is always going in and out, that means every single reason that they said that the US presence is important always disappears periodically. We thus solve for their case because we, with a consistent presence, still allow for us to do everything that they talk about as well as our case as well, which means we get the best of both worlds. Wonderful. Now let's get to the specifics. On their first contention, 3 turns. The first comes from Glacier 17, which finds that American presence at our bases allow us to cause radicalization of terrorism. And this is weighed on 2 ways. First, the evidence indicates that this is the primary source of suicide bombing. So you know it outweighs on magnitude. But second, you weigh it on probability because Bowman evidence indicates that wherever we have our presence in the region, Al-Qaeda operatives historically increased by 10 times, which prove that they're increasing terrorism with US presence. However, we can still fight terrorism and have a smaller presence. You turn it again. As Ashford explains, that it's actually better and less counterproductive to fight terrorism with a smaller presence. You weigh this on probability in 2 ways. First, in 1986, we were able to fight terrorists in Libya by bombing them with planes that flew in from the UK. We can still commit airstrikes that still deter terrorism, but also you turn it again because the Obama light footprint approach in the past worked historically way better than our massive presence and ham-fisted methods right now, which means that a small presence solves back for everything they talk about without the radicalization of a large presence. But lastly, you turn it at the internal link because the Fry evidence explains that our current approach just causes the creation of more terrorist groups because they don't actually destroy the root cause of terror. They just cause them to do the Hydra effect where they split off. The root cause of terror is conflict, which causes the destabilization that forces people to go into terrorism, which is why if we solve for conflict, we solve for their first contention. On the second contention, 1 turn, Ganesh explains that right now we're sending our troops to East Asia instead. If we put our troops out of the Middle East, we'll just send them elsewhere, which means that they just displace the problem, they don't solve for it. But the Goldman evidence indicates that the 1033 program gives only defensive gear, it's not offensive gear, so it doesn't link in. But you turn it again, because their own Fisher evidence indicates that after 9/11, the police military equipment demands actually increased. However, they continually increased this with consistent militarization in the Middle East. They continue to cycle out gear in and out because gear doesn't just stay in the Middle East. It has to be continually produced, which means you see an increased amount of this gear produced in the world in which you keep having militarization in the Middle East. But on their internal link, the Desmond evidence indicates that police can just buy this military equipment from private companies instead. There's no reason why they need to buy it from the USFG. But next, another response comes from Leonard, which explains that after the Ferguson incident in Missouri, 1033 orders dramatically fell. And even after Trump removed these rules, they still continued to fall because people didn't like to buy them anymore. So there's no offense there. On their third contention, on their first link, 4 turns. The first comes from DW, which explains that currently differences in perception between the US, Iran, and Israel have them actually escalating towards conflict because they don't all get along. However, you turn it again because Tisdale explains that were the US to pull out its presence from the Middle East, we'd also want to reassure Israel by doing a mutual defense treaty with them, which A, reassures them, which means they're less likely to do a first strike, but B, means that we can veto them whenever they want to do a strike, which means that there's no way that they're going to do a strike in the world in which you affirm. Weigh this on probability, as Chappelle explains that when we pulled out of Syria, we told Netanyahu beforehand, and Netanyahu was like, okay, that's cool, and they did nothing about it. At the bottom, Indik explains that Israel is developing stronger relations with regional allies such as Saudi Arabia and things like that. So were we to pull out, if worst case scenario, the US weren't to do any military pact, they just get stronger relations and that solves back. On their second link, you turn it, because Johnson explains that our cooperation with our cooperation with Saudi Arabia is good because it keeps them in check and stops them from militarizing because of the threat of sanctions and things like that. I called for their evidence. It's incredibly speculative. You weigh our entire scenario on probability. Their thing just says they might militarize. Our pullouts in the past have never triggered a worldwide proliferation. It won't happen now. But lastly, Hibbs explains that right now they're not going to proliferate because A, they don't have the capability to do so. B, no one's going to sell them the nuclear weapons. And C, they're still going to believe in the US security guarantee even if they pull out of another region, which means that proliferation is like non-unique.
Can we see both pieces? Okay, so can we see that 1033 only gives defensive weapons? They can buy the weapons. No one wants weapons after Ferguson, and then both pieces of defense that you read to proliferation.
Sorry, what do you want on proliferation? The
cards on both the responses you read.
cool. I just sent the whatchamacallit, the 1033 responses.
Okay.
Give me a second. Okay, cool. I think I sent everything you wanted.
Toss when y'all get it so we can start prep time.
Did you send the evidence about how after Ferguson orders fell?
Yep. The third piece of evidence in the first email in the chain.
VNR 19. It's the last line of Leonard.
103 or 1033 acquisition slow because Ferguson controversy.
Oh, okay, cool. We will resume prep time starting now. We used 1:49. It's going to be top down on my case.
No, wait. We'll run 2 more
We'll run
seconds.
2 more seconds. Saudi Arabia?
I literally don't have time. I'm reading so
That was 6 more seconds used. Okay. Is everybody good?
1 sec. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Their overview says that the yo-yo takes out the entirety of our case. No, it doesn't, because the neg is a large troop presence indefinitely, and also I'll respond to this on this case. On T1 about terror, they give no warrant on any of the terms. They can see the IEP evidence. It says that we've seen a 75% decrease in terror deaths, which means uniqueness takes these out. Go to police militarization. The first response says they're sending them to East Asia. They give you no evidence that says that we would send all of the same troops, but 2, the military-industrial complex means that we would probably be manufacturing new weapons, so you would still see a surplus from the pullout. Second, they say 1033 is defensive. This is police propaganda. You can call their evidence, but 2, the single evidence says it doesn't matter because when they have military style weapons, when they have military gear, they feel invincible, which causes them to act out and commit more acts of racial aggression. Then they say post 9/11 there's been more gear. They give no causality here, and they give no magnitude here. And the Mazera evidence that we read says that the largest increase in severity of militarization happened after we pulled out from Iraq and Syria. Our link overwhelms it. Then they say that they can buy them. No one is going to be buying M16s. That is incredibly expensive. But when it gets funneled down to the police departments for free, that's when they have the weapons. Then they say that post Ferguson orders fell. Yeah, That is our argument. Right now, police militarization is on the down, but if you have a surplus of weapons that necessarily gets funneled to the police, which is why you see an increase in racialized violence, we say racism comes first. 3 warrants. A, Ryder explains that a prerequisite to establishing that a prerequisite to having international say in the international community and resolving the issues that they talk about is upholding our own values. 2, Mann explains that a precursor to establishing ethical frameworks is evaluating racism. And 3 is that Cuomo explains when we rely on flashy impacts like all of their stuff about war and stuff, that we intend to neglect state actors who are taking bad action. So prioritize it in this round. Go to our third contention about proliferation. Group both of their responses. They're about Saudi Arabia specifically. Our argument is talking about global proliferation when everyone gets scared. Go to their case. At the top, an overview. Forever wars are called forever wars for a reason. 3 warrants. A, Finn of the Independent explains that the military-industrial complex profits billions off of wars and then uses those billions to force Congress to constantly have us engage in conflict. B, Walt explains that Congress is filled with neoconservatives who love the idea of exporting liberty. And C, Sobelman explains that ally pressure will always force us to intervene. For example, Iran will just threaten to preemptively attack and give the United States an ultimatum where they have to commit acts of aggression. This turns case because the entirety of their case is portraying the U.S. as an aggressive actor and blaming them for the problems in the Middle East, but U.S. aggression still happens. It just manifests in other forms. There's 2 forms. A is bombing. When Nixon pulled out of Vietnam, he began a bombing campaign. And Aronson explains that when Trump pulled out of Syria, he began a bombing campaign. And B is sanctions. Sobelman explains that Israel compelled us to take sanctions with the threat of a preemptive strike previously. And Farsh explains that the sanctions team has killed 500,000 people. This turns the entirety of their case because it means that we are still aggressive and the level of aggression is a lot more. Go to their first thing about Iran. Iran is not expanding. 5 warrants. A, Reid explains that they have domestic issues. B, Rubenstein explains that they are focused on regime survival. C, Bakil explains they are simply sick of war and trying to negotiate. D, Parsi explains that they are 8 times behind the GCC. And E is empirics are on our side. After the Soleimani killings, Iran tried to take de-escalatory actions as opposed to escalatory actions, which is why they launched precision strikes and didn't kill anyone. Then you can turn it because you're emboldening hardliners when you say that their actions are good, and Crops he says that Russia would get involved and force them to act out. Then go to the GCC. You can turn it because the only reason that that the GCC nations are acting out is because they're nervous. And the only way that GCC negotiations can succeed is if the troops are there. Kordsman explains that we limit tensions, and Ulrichsen explains that the GCC is currently mad at us because our involvement is too low, which is why negotiations are failing. So pulling out troops definitely doesn't help that. But also the GCC can't do anything because Al Jazeera explains it's dead in the water because of internal disagreements. Go to their third contention about the Saudis. You can turn it. Saudi Arabia feels protected by the United States, and that's why they negotiate. Tierney 11 of Swarthmore College cites over 100 years of alliance data and says that restraint is more likely because 1, states can never be certain their ally will fully back them up when they launch wars of aggression, and 2, having to get more parties' approval before going to war increases gridlock and increases the chance of de-escalation. But also we think that Saudi Arabia will always be engaged in this war in Yemen because it is an existential conflict against Iran, and they can still have capacity because other nations will fill in and the United States continues to give them arms sales. But if anything, you make them less precise. That's what Rogan says, and so the strikes get a lot worse. And Kitajowski explains that by undermining their capacity, you increase the symmetric capacity of the war, meaning that it is longer and more deadly. Thank you. Vote neg.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Are you ready for cross?
Good when you are.
Cool. So in response to my overview, you say that there is troops indefinitely. Is that the case right now?
That's what the neg is advocating.
Hold on. The neg is advocating for the status quo, correct?
Yeah.
The neg doesn't get any fiat. It doesn't get to say we're doing this instead. It just says we advocate a world in which we don't remove nearly all, right?
It says we don't do the F, we don't pull out troops. So
hold on. No. The neg advocates for the status quo. It says that affirming is bad, but it doesn't say that the opposite of affirming is good. The neg just says what's happening right now is good.
If you vote negative, then we do not pull out troops from the Gulf.
Yes, if we vote negative, we do not pull nearly all of our troops out of the Gulf. But the point of my overview wasn't to my point of my overview is says we pull out all of our troops periodically, and that's worse than pulling out nearly all. Does that make sense?
All of our troops.
Huh?
When was the last time we pulled out all of our troops?
Politico explains that it just happens periodically. So for example, we pull out of Syria, we pull out of other countries, and then we go back in later. So it doesn't happen all at once, but these staggered pullouts is what causes the yo-yo effect. You can have a question.
It's fine. Okay, so wait, I also read warrants on the other side, so I will always stay engaged, but that's fine.
Yeah, we'll handle with those.
Okay, so let's talk about this response that says that the 1033 program is purely defensive. So
okay.
Where did you get this from?
Let me read the card. It says from the New York Times.
Yeah, but no. But it's like this is the administration officials defending the program. Like these are police officials defending.
Okay, so like, do you have like other evidence that indicates it's all offensive? Because like in evidence weighing, you're like, your evidence is bad, and I'm like, okay, cool. So what is your evidence saying?
The evidence that we read, I forget what the card name is. The Fisher evidence says that it loads them up on tactical weapons like M16s.
Okay, so like a gun. So
like military style guns. Like I
okay. So that makes sense to me. So why are police just like completely unable to purchase guns from? Why are police completely unable to purchase guns from anybody other than handouts from the military? Like your whole second contention just seems like it's grasping at straws.
I would disagree there heavily. This is probably the nicest contention I've written in my debate career. But also,
okay, never mind. I agree with you. It's the best contention I've ever heard.
It's like very difficult to buy these weapons. So one, they're military weapons. So the military.
Okay, so let me ask you. Hold on. Does military equipment just stay in the Middle East, or do people get redeployed periodically?
I'm begging you. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Super expensive to buy military grade weapons. Like the average salary for a local police officer is definitely not enough that you.
Wait, local police officers are not going like, I'm gonna buy an M16 at Walmart. No, it's like the police administration as a whole that always has the money.
Like local departments are cash strapped.
Where is all this analysis?
So much debt. That's why the government has to bail them out.
Where is all this debt analysis? Where did all this come from? Isn't the government paying for the military too? Shouldn't they still be in debt?
The government buys these weapons and funnels them to the military.
But you said the reason the government can't buy it for the police is because they're in debt, but they're still buying it for the military. None of this makes sense. But I think we're out of time.
Internal police departments are not going to be buying weapons. The U.S. government gives it to the military. Okay.
They can also give it to the police.
Half of it. Just let me finish the last line.
We're way out of time. Okay, so we'll be taking some prep now.
All right, cool. Jason, can you mute yourself on the call? Thanks. So the overview is going to be their case, our case, their case, and then weighing.
Wait, is the weighing the same like overview?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, no, it's not the small persistence overview. I'm going to be like responding to their warrants about like why police brutality comes first, and then doing my own independent weighing off of that.
So, so you want the weighing like right next to it or somewhere else?
Right next to it.
Okay.
So our case, their case, weighing. Oh, and also on my case, starting with this overview. Cool. Is anybody not ready? On our overview, they just read a ton of reasons why the military-industrial complex is going to continue to start conflicts. Remember, whenever you affirm the resolution, you're fiating it, right? They're just reading reasons as to why the resolution can happen. Insofar as whenever you vote after you remove U.S. military presence, that means we still get access to all of our offense. But even then, this whole entire thing is an absolute blip storm. They read two warrants. The first warrant is about why there's going to be an increase in bombing campaigns. There is no contextualization of how much bombing campaigns are going to go up or how many people they're going to kill. On their thing about sanctions, first of all, I would say that sanctions are non-unique because Trump is a hardline actor and will always do them. But second of all, on their thing about like 500,000 deaths, again, there's no contextualization of this argument. You have no idea how much it's going to increase. Specifically, let's look at our contention. On our first link about Iranian standoff, they say that there's going to be an emboldenment of hardliners. Here's the issue. Uniqueness disproves their link because what Ruhi finds is that there's escalation existing in the status quo, which means that they're not the only world that's emboldening hardliners is our world. You give us an error probability because you have no certainty that there's going to be more emboldenment inside of their world. On our second link about the GCC, they read two responses. The first is that troops are crucial. Here's the thing, US troops are crucial. Here's the thing, clearly they're not crucial because the uniqueness disproves their link. Again, the ELIS evidence indicates that right now there's no negotiations in the status quo because of US military presence. So clearly troops aren't working. Their second response from Al Jazeera says that political differences are going to make it so nobody cooperates. Remember, our warrant is that once the United States is out of the region, they're going to work together and overcome these political differences because the Iranian threat is much bigger than like small issues over religion, right? That's why we give you the young evidence that says that once you remove the biggest divisive force in the region, which is in this case is the United States, that makes it so the GCC can exist and pursue negotiations. This is critical because our Velasco evidence indicates that they're 6.7 times better at peace and would prevent 100,000 deaths. On our second contention about Saudi Arabia, they say restraint is more likely. Remember, they still have the U.S. security guarantee within the region. It's not like our alliance stops. So remember, there's not going to be any conflict. They don't get access to this turn. On to their case. Onto militarism, they completely mishandled the Ganesh turn at the beginning of our case. What we say is that whenever the United States pulls out of the region, they're going to send troops to East Asia. They say there's no evidence. You can call for the evidence. It's there. On their second response, they say that the military and industrial complex means that they're always going to pursue new weapons. That's exactly our point, right? The difference is that whenever the United States is pulled out empirically, they send troops to East Asia. You weigh this turn on severity because in the United States, we at least have some form of protections against police brutality. But in East Asia, there's far fewer protections, which makes police brutality way more rampant. So if we win this turn, we also win their case. But even then, on their thing about like weighing racism, for the first two warrants, there's no warrant as to why there's racism is the ethical a priori. But second of all, I would also argue that wartime crimes increase racism and they increase human trafficking, which means we link in. On their thing about flashy war scenarios, remember our Al-Maradi evidence says that the media has actually desensitized us to war. So it's not flashy issues. They're still incredibly prevalent. In any situation, we outweigh because we say that whenever conflicts happen in the Middle East, it increases the amount of state crackdowns on the people, which means that we outweigh. You cross-apply our severity weighing that says then the Middle East crackdowns are uniquely worse because there's more protections in the US, which means we outweigh case.
We'll run some prep time starting now. Okay, that was 1:30 used.
Sorry, how much is left?
10 seconds.
Cool.
Okay.
Is everybody ready? It will start on It'll start on the overview at the top of their case. We're all ready? Okay.
Wait, two seconds.
I know.
Okay, that was 3 more seconds used, so 7 seconds left.
Okay, everyone's good? Their only response to the overview is that we fiat that we pull out troops, but they've conceded all the reasons why we have incentives to engage in other ways. The Finn evidence says that the military-industrial complex lobbies our government to keep us at war. The Waltz evidence says that we feel the need to export liberty and democracy elsewhere. And the Sogelman evidence says that our allies will have tons of control. For example, Israel threatened to launch a preemptive attack, and so they want to make us more aggressive. All of those warrants are conceded, so we will still engage in the Middle East in other ways, and they've conceded both ways that we do that, which is A, we do it through bombings. They say there's no contextualization, but the Aronson evidence says that the bombings were directly a response. The reason this takes out their entire case is because as long as we're threatening Iran in other ways, they will not negotiate with us because they think the United States is still involved. The argument they go for is that when the U.S. is gone, these Arab states will negotiate with Iran. But as long as the United States is involved in some capacity, Iran will not negotiate. This argument is dropped and it is game over. The second place you can vote is on the B point about sanctions. We say from our Sogelman evidence that 500,000 people died because of those sanctions, which was more than the Iraqi war. They say there's no contextualization. I just explained that the sanctions are worse. And our evidence specifically says that Israel would force us to put sanctions on these other nations. This is dropped and outweighs. It's game over. Let's go to our case. Two places to vote for us on our case. First is on the police militarization argument. We say that when we pull out from the Middle East, we have massive surpluses of weapons. The WHM evidence says that it's in the millions. And we say through the DoD 1033 program, those get circled to the police. The one response we get is this turn, which is not really a turn, that says that we would redeploy to Southeast Asia. We say that even if we redeploy to Southeast Asia, the military industrial complex means that we would build new weapons for those soldiers to go into the Southeast Asia, meaning there's still a surplus of weapons that gets pushed down to the police. They say that it increases crackdowns within those nations, but we don't give weapons to those nations' police officers. It's specifically to U.S. police officers when we have surpluses of weapons domestically. They misunderstand this argument. The reason this ends the round is because we say that historically when we've pulled out, we saw a 28 percentage point increase in the number of departments that were militarized. And we say that this increases police brutality, A, because when the police are militarized, they see the public as the enemy, so they're more likely to crack down, and B, they have to use the weapons within a year, so they're more likely to attack innocent. This is important because we say it increases racialized violence because that's where the majority of police brutality is. They missed the Ryder evidence on the weighing that says a prerequisite to our ability to engage elsewhere is legitimacy. And unless we can solve racial issues in our own nation, other countries won't listen to us, which turns their argument about crackdowns and conflict because no nation is going to listen to us on issues of crackdowns if we have no legitimacy, meaning we outweigh. Second place you vote is on the pro-live link because it's dropped and was frontline. We say because all their responses are only about Saudi Arabia, but when the United States pulls out, other allies like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan fear that the United States could abandon them next, which means they increase proliferation. That's dropped. We say that means that they increase proxy wars because they become more aggressive. The Allison evidence says that there's a 54% increase, which A, turns their case because Iran is going to be threatened, but B, outweighs on scope because it's global militarization and global proxy wars. They're only impacting to proxy wars in the Middle East.
Y'all good?
Yes.
You want first question?
Jason, you want to take it?
I'm good.
Y'all can take it.
Okay. So let's talk about negotiations. So what do these negotiations look like? Who's involved? What are they discussing? What actually comes out of them?
I mean, conflicts within the region.
Like just spell out the negotiation scenario for me. Who sits down at the table? What
So
are they
Iran starts a conflict. Then countries like Oman get involved and they negotiate with Iran, say, hey, we shouldn't have this conflict. And then they pursue peace.
What flavor of coffee is the delegation from Iran drinking?
I'm not entirely sure.
What in the world?
I don't have a question either. So
Okay. It's really probably like what's the most common form of coffee?
like hazelnut or like
I don't
French.
know, like a French brew.
Ooh, you know what's really good? They have these blueberry coffee K-cups at my school.
That's sick.
Everyone hates them, but they're actually the best.
I've actually forgotten what school looks like, so I don't know what that word means.
You guys do you have a question?
No, not really.
No.
How's virtual junior spring going for you, Jason?
Oh yeah, it's going wonderful. Kind of nuked everything that was supposed to happen. So no standardized testing, no anything. Just sitting here yelling at my computer when I could be outside.
You guys want to use the rest of cross to prep?
Or if you have questions for us, you can ask. They don't even.
Yeah, I've just used cross.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna use it for prep. Thanks.
Okay. We have a minute and a half left. You can just fill that up.
Mute yourself.
Oh wait, to clarify with the judges, is it okay if we don't ask questions during Crossfire? Like,
Yeah.
neither questions. It's okay with everyone? Okay, nice. Just checking. Okay, that's technically the end of Cross. So
We're gonna take our actual turn.
yeah, sounds good.
All right, cool.
Okay, so I'm going to go to each of their voters, and then I'm going to do some weighing on all of them. We'll start with, it'll be starting with the neg, bottom up. So we'll start with prolif, and then we'll go to police brutality, and then we'll go to their weighing about racism, wherever you flowed that, and then we'll end with the AF. Okay? So is there anyone not ready? On prolif, they dropped the weighing that I give in rebuttal. That tells you this has never happened before in any of our pullouts. There's no unique warrant why, which means that the way that you outweigh our case over prolif scenario is on probability. If there's no chance of this prolif scenario ever happening, they're just grasping at straws rather than looking at the real world, which means that we win already. But let's go to their second contention about police brutality. We explain the Ganesh evidence, which explains the US just takes troops out from one area and puts them in another. They come up in summary and they say, oh, the weapons are going to become more high tech. There is zero clarity, which is what you're going to be weighing this contention on. There's no clarity on what higher tech weapons mean in terms of emboldening police officers, or what higher tech weapons mean in terms of people getting more violent on the streets, which means that there's no way that you could weigh their second contention. But let's get to the racism weighing. In summary, they extend one warrant, which says that racism means there's no legitimacy, but they don't actually extend a warrant why. There's nothing there. Don't let them extend something new in final focus. They just say racism, it kills all legitimacy. Instead, the way that we link into racism is that in increased conflict increases state crackdowns disproportionately on groups such as minorities. So us, by linking into conflict, takes out their second contention. Let's go to our conflict. On our case, they read a bunch of responses about how the military-industrial complex will always be bad and this will mean more bombs. The problem is to drop those bombs in these planes, and insofar as the AF fiats the resolution, they're not going to be there anymore, which means we stop the military-industrial complex from starting conflicts in the region. Second, they just say sanctions are bad, but they don't contextualize how much more sanctions get put there. I get that sanctions are bad, but I don't get what more sanctions are going to be put. Let's go to our link chain. Right now, Iran is being super aggressive, and we need to decrease that with getting rid of our presence, which makes them less likely to start a conflict. Our second link is the same. Our presence in the region is getting in the way of diplomacy between our allies. When we pull out of that, our allies can work together, and they're 6.7 times better at doing so. De-escalating tensions prevents a war which stops hundreds of thousands of people of dying, lots of victims of racism, which links into their case, and is the best weighing on probability because they have zero clarity and zero probability for the pro-life scenario. At the end of the day, if you want to stop conflict, you're going to have to affirm.
We'll run our
We have 7 seconds. We'll start it now.
I think y'all are out.
Everybody good? Going to start on their case and then go to our case. Is everybody ready? Yeah. In no speech have we had any engagement with the 3 reasons why the United States will always aggress. A. Finn of the Independent explains that the military-industrial complex lobbies billions of dollars to keep us at war. B. Walt of the Independent explains that Congress is filled with neoconservatives who want to export liberty. And C. Silverman explains that Israel will threaten a preemptive attack and views that to pressure the United States to continue aggression, and they have done that historically. And the implications of this is A. the bombing evidence, the bombing. We give empirics on this. The Aronson evidence says that we actually did bomb. They say that they get around this because there are no troops, but no, we are not talking about actual troop presence. We're talking about flyover bombing, and this was new. Don't let them respond to it. And second, they talk about sanctions. Second, they talk about they say that we don't contextualize how much sanctions. None of this matters. Our argument here is that as long as the United States is still aggressive, Iran has no incentive to negotiate because they're still being bombed, they're still being sanctioned, and they're still lashing out, which is the entire link into their case. So U.S. aggression means that their entire case is non-unique. This takes it out. It was dropped. Don't give them any of their responses. Go to my contention 2 about the police. Their only response is that we give no clarity on this argument and we don't explain how the weapons get more high tech. No, our argument here is that even if we send troops to Asia, the military-industrial complex will force us to make new weapons to send with those troops, which still causes a stockpile, which through the DoD 1033 program gets funneled down to the police, causing a net increase in racialized violence. This is all conceded. And even if you buy that there's a small increase in other forms of crackdowns and stuff from war, this is the most clear impacts into racism because they've conceded Masera evidence that says we saw a 28% increase in severely militarized police departments, and it's the only quantification on racialized violence. When the police officers have military weapons, they see the public as an enemy. They need to use the weapons within a year, otherwise they get taken away. That increases racialized violence. Also, the other place you vote for us is off of our city. Also, racism outweighs because if we don't have a value system, then we can't evaluate things. So then go to proliferation. The only response that this has never happened before, but this is new. We say this because we have never had a full pullout, and Saudi Arabia is our key ally. That's why other nations would proliferate. This turns their case because it means that at A, when they have nukes, they're not negotiating, and B, it increases the chance of other proxy wars starting, which also turns their case. And it links back into the conflict caused, and it outweighs on scope because it's global. Thank you.
All right, cool.
Okay. We've reached a decision. Should I like summon? Is everyone here? Okay. So it's a 2-1 decision for the pro. I sat, so I can start. So I started with the weighing debate, and I'm inclined to believe that biggest impact is this idea about racism. However, the AF team correctly extends that in summary and final focus that they don't give a link into why racism is the only impact or only way that they can build legitimacy, and they don't tell you why it's the only link, and they don't tell you like why we should like evaluate this. So I'm believed to think that the biggest link into this racism impact is who wins. So I think that the con team extending their idea about proliferation is the biggest link into this racism impact. However, I don't think that they actually win this argument because the weighing from the AF case or AF rebuttal is extended and not responded to in neg summary. So I believe that if AF wins their contention, then they're going to win this round. So I go to the AF case and I look to that first. And the reason why I don't think AF wins this argument is because of the overview that's consistently extended about the three reasons why there's an incentive for the United States to always get involved. The responses that we get in summary and final focus are this idea that there's a fiat and there's no scalability onto how much it goes up. I think this is well responded to by the con when they say that, like, look, even if bombings can happen outside. So even if troops get pulled out, you can still have like the bombings fly over. But outside of that, I still think the sanctions response takes it out because you can have sanctions no matter where you are. And the impact off of this overview is conceded through pro summary and pro final focus, which is that if Iran sees the United States is still involved, then they're less likely to negotiate. And the entire link off of the Gulf Cooperation Council analysis was that if the US leaves, they can resolve their own internal differences and force Iran to a cooperation table. So based off of this overview, I think that functions as terminal defense on the warrant on Gulf Cooperation Council. So with that being said, neither side has offense at this point, in my opinion. So I go back to the contention 2 on police brutality, and this is where I think con wins. I don't think they're winning the racism wing. I think like it's going to be off so I don't evaluate that. But on the Ganesh turn, you say that troops to East Asia are just going to displace the problem. But the con team is pretty consistent in the back half that's saying that one, it's not about the weapons don't go to Asia. The weapons go from the 1033 program back to the United States. And 2, even if they are going to be using the same weapons, the military industrial complex is actually going to make sure that at least some weapons are going to be brand new, which I believe, and there's no warranting given as to why that's going to be different. So I don't know how many new weapons are going to be funneled, but I know at least some new weapons are going to be funneled. So I'm pretty comfortable voting off the impact of like 1 or 2 guns because it's the only thing left on my flow. Do you guys have any questions? Okay.
Yeah, that was a really good RFD.
I think I might be the only other judge here. At least I voted pro. So yeah, I don't see her listed anymore. Just very briefly, ultimately, like the overview argument, I believe that pro wins that with respect to fiat. I was really having a hard time wrapping my head around this notion that on the negative they would be arguing for like a war that effectively would go on forever and ever. But then going into the specifics, I thought that framing the round in terms of like possibility was effective. And then I looked at a few key points: militarization, proliferation, racism, and GCC. On all those points, I was ultimately compelled by the affirmative arguments that if we were to pull out the most part, we would see improved. Improved situation on a few different counts. I think regional cooperation with GCC, the Young card, I was compelled by that. I also got the turn with respect to racism. If you increase conflict, which is what you're saying will happen if we remain there, that would only have the impact of increasing racism. And I also thought that you effectively countered the militarization argument by noting that when you increase gear just by having a presence there, you're going to increase propensity to actually buy these weapons that they're talking about. So ultimately, I was compelled by the probability argument and just felt more comfortable voting pro.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.
Please go win so I can say I lost to the champion.
We'll try our best. No
Okay.
guarantees.
I was actually very satisfied with this round. I thought it was like a really good round.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I also like
Yeah.
pretty much agree with your RFD. I think it would have been mine if I was judging.
Mama, can you